Arthur had everything: wealth, power, absolute control. But all it took was a single glance, a single exchange of words with the wrong woman, to realize that his entire carefully planned life could fall apart in seconds. Torn between the stable love of Helena and the overwhelming passion of Isabella, Arthur believed he was in control of the game until he discovered that the rules change when feelings come into play. Between secrets, betrayals, and devastating consequences, he will be forced to make an impossible choice, knowing that any decision will destroy lives and hearts. How far would you go to hide the truth from those you love the most? And what price would you be willing to pay for your most irresistible mistake? Arthur discreetly adjusted his tie as he walked through the hall of the charity event, aware of the stares that would follow his every move. It was a typical evening in his carefully planned life. Well-cut suits, crystal goblets, and polite smiles handed out to important guests. With his impeccable posture and assured gaze, Arthur was in complete control of the situation, as always. Next to him, Helena was chatting politely with a group of influential businessmen, the perfect image of stability and elegance. His girlfriend was everything he needed: intelligent, balanced, and perfectly predictable. But that night, something different was about to happen. While pretending to be interested in the conversation around him, Arthur noticed a discreet movement in the opposite corner of the room, where small groups were watching a young woman in front of a blank canvas. She was an artist, a special guest at the event. The woman wore colorful clothes that contrasted radically with the sobriety of the dark suits and dresses around her. Her carefree, authentic smile immediately caught the eye. Arthur moved away discreetly, intrigued, and approached the artist, stopping next to the small crowd. Isabella seemed completely absorbed as she began to paint strong, intense strokes on the white canvas. Suddenly, as if she had felt his gaze, she turned to Arthur and smiled with an almost defiant naturalness. "Do you like what you see?" she asked in a slightly teasing tone. Arthur couldn't help but smile amusedly at the woman's unexpected boldness. "It's not the kind of art I usually appreciate, but I confess I'm intrigued." Isabella laughed softly, not bothered by his frankness. "People like you don't usually like the unpredictable." Arthur raised an eyebrow slightly, feeling strangely challenged. "People like me? Yes, serious, elegant, controlling businessmen," she replied without hesitation. "Those who have their whole lives perfectly planned out and don't allow themselves any surprises." Arthur raised one eyebrow, slightly impressed by the precise and daring reading she had made of him in just a few minutes. "You seem bored with the event," he retorted, trying to regain control of the conversation. "A little. I find these parties very predictable," she said, staring at him intensely. "Everyone pretending to care about something other than money or their own image." Arthur felt intrigued and slightly disconcerted by the disconcerting sincerity of the woman he had just met. "So why are you here?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "Because I like to defy expectations," said Isabella, smiling enigmatically. "Besides, there's always the possibility of something or someone interesting turning up." Arthur held her gaze for a moment, feeling for the first time in many years something completely unknown to him, a spark of genuine interest in someone who broke all his carefully established rules. "Well, in that case, I hope I won't disappoint you." "Don't worry," Isabella replied, winking at him teasingly. "I'm still deciding whether you're predictable or worth the surprise." Arthur felt his heart speed up unexpectedly. That conversation had awakened in him something he hadn't felt for a long time: real interest in someone, sincere curiosity about the unpredictable. He glanced quickly at Helena, who was still talking distractedly, without noticing the subtle change that was beginning to take place inside him. He knew he was entering dangerous territory, but something about the intensity and chaos emanating from that mysterious woman was irresistible. Arthur was about to discover the price of challenging his own perfection. In the days following the event, Arthur couldn't get Isabella out of his mind. The memory of the conversation, of that provocative look, kept hovering in his mind, disturbing his usual concentration. He tried to convince himself that it was just a passing curiosity, but his interest grew with each failed attempt to forget her. A week later, passing a well-known art gallery in the city centre, Arthur noticed a small group of people gathered outside. Without knowing exactly why, he decided to stop the car and check it out. As soon as he entered, he immediately saw the familiar figure of Isabella explaining her work to some enthusiastic admirers. Arthur approached discreetly, but the artist quickly realized his presence. She gave him a wry smile, clearly surprised by his unexpected appearance. "It seems you really like my art, Millionaire," she commented, with a teasing tone as she politely dismissed the others. Arthur, remaining calm, looked at one of the paintings, as if deeply analyzing its value. "I'm still trying to understand what exactly makes your art so special." Isabella crossed her arms, amused by the challenge implicit in his answer. "Convince me that this painting is really worth all that," he continued without looking away. She took a few steps towards him, approaching him slowly and staring at him intensely. "Convince me first that your perfect life isn't just a golden prison." Arthur felt the impact of the words like a punch in the chest. For the first time in a long time, someone was confronting him directly, forcing him to question the life he had so carefully built. He tried to disguise his annoyance, but his silence was enough of an answer for Isabella. On the other side of town, Helena began to notice small changes in Arthur's behavior. He was more distracted, distant, and seemed to be working later and later. The usual smile and constant tranquility were slowly disappearing, replaced by something she couldn't clearly identify. Meanwhile, Arthur kept finding reasons to justify his interest in Isabella. "It's just curiosity," he repeated mentally. However, each time their gazes met, this explanation became less convincing. The attraction between them was palpable, and he knew he was crossing a dangerous line. One evening, after another event, Arthur and Isabella walked together down a quiet, deserted street. The conversation flowed easily and lightly until, in a moment of silence, Arthur turned to face her. Without thinking about the consequences, he gently held her face and approached her slowly. Their hearts were beating fast, synchronized in the intensity of that forbidden moment. When their lips finally met, Arthur felt a shock run through his entire body. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't stop himself. As they slowly pulled apart, Isabella smiled, her eyes still closed. "So what now? Have you decided if I'm worth the surprise?" she whispered, slowly opening her eyes and staring at him with a mixture of desire and defiance. Arthur took a deep breath, realizing the point of no return he had just reached. Nothing would ever be the same. He was used to absolute control, but that kiss represented the first step towards chaos. And as incredible as it seemed at that moment, he didn't care about anything else. Arthur was convinced that he could handle the situation he had created, but he soon realized that maintaining two completely separate lives was much more difficult than he had imagined. As his involvement with Isabella became more intense, he felt his ability to control every detail slowly crumble. Helena, with whom he shared a quiet and perfectly structured life, began to notice the subtle changes in his behavior with concern. One evening, while they were having dinner together at home, Helena watched Arthur carefully, noticing that he seemed lost in thought. She gently placed the cutlery on the table, facing him directly. "Are you all right, Arthur? You've been working so hard lately. You seem distracted." Arthur felt a pang of guilt run through his chest, but quickly pulled his expression together so as not to arouse suspicion. "It's just business, love. You know how it is," he replied with a reassuring smile, trying to disguise the lie he was sinking deeper and deeper into. Helena, however, didn't seem entirely convinced. She nodded slowly, but her gaze remained on him, as if searching for signs of a truth that he insisted on hiding. Meanwhile, his relationship with Isabella was rapidly intensifying. Isabella was the complete opposite of Helena, spontaneous, unpredictable, intense in every attitude and conversation. And while this delighted Arthur, it also made him insecure, because he knew he couldn't control her feelings and reactions. One quiet afternoon, while they were in Isabella's apartment, the artist noticed Arthur's restless behavior as he checked his cell phone for the 10th time in a few minutes. She frowned, curious and suspicious. "Are you sure you're not hiding anything from me?" she asked directly, staring at him with a penetrating gaze. Arthur raised his face immediately, surprised by the sudden question. For a brief moment he hesitated, unable to completely disguise the shock he felt at being confronted. The momentary silence that followed was enough to plant a painful doubt in Isabella's heart. "Of course not," he finally replied with a forced smile, trying to sound convincing. "Why do you think that?" Isabella slowly looked away, feeling uncomfortable for the first time in his presence. "You sometimes seem distant, as if you were hiding something, or someone." Arthur took a deep breath, feeling pressured and guilty again. He knew that Isabella was extremely perceptive, and that any mistake could cost her dearly. However, the thought of losing what they had achieved together seemed unbearable. He needed to buy time. "I'm not hiding anything," he assured her, coming up to her and gently holding her hands, trying to show sincerity. "It's just a lot of work. Sometimes I get overwhelmed." Isabella watched him in silence for a few seconds, assessing whether or not she believed his vague answer. Finally, she nodded slowly, deciding to trust him once again, even though a small voice in her mind was already warning her that she might be making a big mistake. Arthur hugged her afterwards, feeling the crushing weight of the lies he had told both women grow rapidly. He knew he couldn't keep this up indefinitely, but the idea of making a definitive choice seemed impossible. He was trapped in his own dangerous game, aware that sooner or later it would all come out, dragging him down with it. That evening, Arthur returned home exhausted, feeling emotionally drained by the continuous effort to keep two realities separate. When he entered the apartment, he noticed an unusual and uncomfortable silence. Helena was sitting in the living room, motionless, with an expression he had never seen before on her face. Something inside him instantly froze, feeling the foreboding that this would be the night her lies would finally be revealed. "Helena, did something happen?" he asked cautiously, trying to hide his growing nervousness as he slowly approached. She raised her eyes to face him, and the coldness in her gaze made his heart squeeze painfully. Without saying a word, Helena picked up his cell phone, which was on the coffee table, and handed it to him firmly, almost aggressively. On the screen there was a clear, unambiguous message from Isabella. "I need you tonight. Only you." Arthur felt the blood completely leave his face, leaving him pale, vulnerable, and unable to react immediately. His mind, always so agile and strategic, was now paralyzed, unable to come up with a coherent excuse. Helena, with frightening calm, finally broke the oppressive silence. "Arthur, who is Isabella?" she asked coldly, her voice low, almost too controlled. Arthur tried to take a deep breath, gaining a few seconds to try and organize his thoughts. He desperately needed to find a justification that would convince Helena, but her expression revealed that any lie would be useless at that point. Nevertheless, he tried. "Helena, it's not what you think. She's just an artist with whom I'm working on an important project." "Don't make a fool of me," Helena interrupted, standing up with her eyes blazing with restrained anger. "A message like that doesn't come from a simple co-worker. How long has this been going on?" Arthur swallowed, unable to answer the direct question that was hitting him hard. Helena, seeing his hesitation, shook her head, deeply hurt by the implicit confirmation of betrayal. On the other side of town, Isabella was also beginning to sense something strange was happening. Arthur's vague excuses, his constant delays and sudden absences were becoming too frequent to ignore. Determined to clear up her doubts, she began to discreetly investigate social networks, sifting through information that, until then, she had never considered important. It only took her a few minutes to find what she was looking for. A recent photo of Arthur and Helena together, smiling and hugging at an event, surrounded by friends. The shock hit Isabella hard, leaving her breathless, completely devastated by the unexpected discovery. The man she had fallen deeply in love with was clearly engaged, living a double life and keeping her in the dark about the truth. Feeling betrayed and hurt, Isabella put down her cell phone with trembling hands, silent tears streaming down her face as her mind processed the painful reality of the situation. She wasn't the only woman in his life. She was just a piece in a game of lies and manipulation. Arthur, now cornered by the truth, realized that everything he had painstakingly built was rapidly crumbling in front of him. Looking into Helena's hurt and disappointed eyes, he felt overwhelmed by devastating regret. He had believed that he could control everything, but now he could clearly see the high price he would pay for his wrong choices. He was about to discover that some decisions had no turning back. The following night was fraught with tension. Arthur had spent the day trying to think of a way to repair the damage, but reality seemed to overwhelm him. There was no longer any control over his situation. The man who had always prided himself on anticipating problems and avoiding risks was now completely at the mercy of his own choices. There was no easy way out of this impasse without causing suffering. Deciding to face Helena and try to explain himself once more, Arthur headed for her apartment, but when he reached the building's lobby, his heart stopped for an instant. There was Helena, standing near the elevator, in front of another woman he recognized immediately, Isabella. An icy shiver ran down his spine, leaving him motionless as he watched helplessly the imminent collision of the two worlds he had tried to keep apart. Helena looked bewildered, analyzing the woman in front of her with perplexed eyes. Isabella maintained a confused expression, assessing Helena with a mixture of curiosity and obvious discomfort. "You're Helena, aren't you?" asked Isabella, uncertain and hesitant. Helena took a deep breath, her eyes showing a bitter sadness mixed with anger and resentment. "Yes. And you're his girlfriend too, apparently," she replied in a firm voice, although a silent tear slid discreetly down her cheek. Isabella felt the weight of those words immediately, like a violent blow she hadn't expected to receive. She took a step back, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet as she struggled to control the emotions that were suffocating her. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this," she said, trembling, almost begging for understanding. Helena smiled sadly, staring at Isabella not with hatred, but with a deep pain that seemed to slowly consume her heart. "I know. Arthur has always been good at hiding what he doesn't want anyone to see," she said, drying her tears. "We've both been deceived, Isabella. Neither of us is to blame here." Arthur, realizing that he couldn't remain hidden in that scene, slowly approached, knowing that he was about to face his most difficult moment. His voice, weak and unsure, cut through the tension that hung heavy in the room. "Helena, Isabella, I can explain." But before he could finish his sentence, Helena raised her hand, interrupting him immediately. "You don't have to explain, Arthur. It's all clear now. You wanted to play with two lives, two people who trusted you. And you know what's worse? You didn't think of anyone but yourself." Isabella stared at Arthur sorrowfully, unable to hide the disappointment that was destroying all the illusions she had built up about him. Her words came out soft, but devastating. "You said you weren't hiding anything. I believed you." Arthur felt himself suffocating under the weight of guilt. For the first time in his life, he was truly lost. There was no justification or excuse that could erase what he had done. His lies had wounded the two most important women in his life, leaving him speechless and bereft. Helena took one last look at Isabella, both of them sharing an instant of mutual understanding in the face of their shared pain. Without saying another word, they both turned their backs on Arthur and left in opposite directions, leaving him alone in the middle of the empty hall, finally aware of the irreversible consequences of his choices. For the first time, Arthur felt unable to control his own destiny. In the days following the devastating confrontation between Helena and Isabella, Arthur saw his perfect life fall completely apart. The calm, organized routine he cherished so much had turned into constant chaos, marked by unanswered messages and refused calls. He tried several times to contact Helena, hoping that time would help ease his hurt, but the coldness with which she ignored him made it clear that perhaps the damage had been too deep. Desperate not to lose everything, Arthur decided to look for Isabella first. He knew that if there was anyone who could understand his impulsiveness, it would be her. He found her in her gallery, preparing a new exhibition. She was concentrating on her canvases when she noticed him. As she turned to face him, her cold, distant expression cut him deeply. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" she asked dryly, without moving a step closer. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to find the courage to face the rejection evident in her eyes. "I've come to try and put things right. Let me explain, Isabella, please." She crossed her arms defensively, keeping a firm distance between them. "Explain what exactly? That I was just a diversion, an adventure to relieve your boredom?" Arthur felt a sharp pain as he realized how much he had hurt someone who had only shown him authenticity and passion. "It wasn't like that, Isabella. You're much more than that to me." She shook her head slowly, with a disappointed expression, as if she had heard those same words before. "I don't doubt your feelings, Arthur. I felt it was real, at least for me. But that doesn't change the fact that you already had someone, and I never agreed to share." Arthur moved closer, feeling a growing desperation. "You're not just the other, Isabella. You made me feel alive again. Something I didn't even know I needed until I met you." She held his gaze for a long moment, as if she wanted to believe those words, but something inside her had already broken irreparably. "Maybe that's exactly what I was to you, Arthur," she said firmly, although her voice was laced with emotion. "But I'm not a mistake. I can't stay here any longer, waiting for you to sort out your life while you destroy mine." He felt the brutal impact of those words, realizing for the first time that perhaps he was about to lose everything. He tried to touch her hand gently, but Isabella pulled back, making it clear that the distance between them was final. Meanwhile, Arthur couldn't forget Helena. That night, in a last desperate attempt, he decided to go to her apartment. When he arrived, he found her at the entrance, coming out with a small suitcase in her hand. Her eyes were red, marked by nights of tears. "Helena, please don't go. Let's talk, sort this out." She shook her head slowly with watery eyes and faced him with firmness and dignity, despite the obvious pain. "There's nothing more to talk about, Arthur. You chose to live a lie. I can't trust you again." Arthur took a deep breath, feeling completely powerless. Everything around him seemed to be slowly falling apart, like sand slipping through his fingers. As he watched Helena leave in silence, he felt absolute emptiness overwhelm him for the first time in his life. Now he was completely alone, facing the devastating consequences of the decisions he had made. For the first time, Arthur realized that the price to pay for his impulsive choices was much greater than he had imagined. Months had passed since Arthur had seen Helena leave, and Isabella closed the door on him for good. The loneliness he so feared had become his only companion. Every night in the silent mansion was a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Arthur felt the crushing weight of the choices he had made, choices that had destroyed not only his stable relationship, but also his only real chance of living a true and intense love with Isabella. Tired of living stuck in the past, Arthur finally realized that he needed to face his feelings and try to correct at least some of the mistakes he had made. He decided to look for her once again. He knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he had to try. He had to say everything he hadn't been able to say before. He found Isabella in the same cafe where they had met months before, sitting alone at a faraway table. She seemed absorbed, absent-mindedly drawing in a notebook. When she noticed him, she raised her eyes slowly, her surprised expression soon replaced by a calm resignation. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said softly, closing her notebook without facing him directly. Arthur sat down in front of her, his heart squeezing for the long-awaited and long-dreaded reunion. "If I could go back, I'd do everything differently, Isabella. Everything." Isabella slowly raised her eyes, assessing him in silence for a moment, as if she were carefully measuring the sincerity of that statement. "But you can't go back," she said calmly, her voice filled with restrained pain. "So answer me something honestly now. Do you regret having met me?" Arthur felt his throat close up at the direct question, almost cruel in its absolute sincerity. He tried to answer immediately, but the words just wouldn't come. His momentary hesitation revealed everything that needed to be said. The painful silence between them seemed to shout louder than any words. "That's what I thought," she finally said, smiling sadly and resignedly. "Maybe the problem was never me or Helena. Maybe the problem has always been you, Arthur. Your fear of losing control of everything, your mania for trying to possess the whole world, whatever the cost." Arthur swallowed, feeling the force of those words hit him straight in the heart. He knew Isabella was right. His obsession with controlling every aspect of his life had led him exactly to the point he feared most: complete emotional uncontrol. "Isabella, I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt anyone," he murmured, almost in a whisper, feeling vulnerable and exposed. She nodded slowly, looking at him with a sad but determined understanding. "I know that. The problem is that you didn't think about the consequences until it was too late. Now maybe we should accept that what we had was real, intense, but it's over. We need to move on." Arthur took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words hit him like a definitive sentence. He knew Isabella was right. Time would never go back, and some scars would never heal completely. He nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable end for the first time. As he watched Isabella walk out the door, Arthur realized that he had lost much more than just two women. He had also lost the opportunity to experience something real, something profound, something that now seemed unattainable. And at that moment, he knew that he might never be able to love again. Months had passed since his last painful encounter with Isabella. Now, alone in his immense mansion, Arthur gazed silently at the view of the city illuminated by the nightlights. His life, once perfectly controlled and carefully planned, seemed empty and purposeless. The silence that had once given him comfort was now a constant reminder of the loneliness and choices that had brought him to this point. During that period, Helena moved on with her life. Arthur had discovered through mutual friends that she had found someone new, a man who made her happy in a way that he hadn't been able to. Isabella, on the other hand, had also rebuilt herself, establishing herself as a successful artist, gaining the emotional freedom he had never been able to offer her. Arthur took a deep breath, feeling an emptiness fill his chest as he analyzed every mistake he had made, every misstep that had brought him to this point. He finally realized how wrong he had been about himself, believing he could have everything without paying any price. His pride, ambition, and arrogance had cost him more than he had ever imagined. And now, as he gazed at the city that continued to live indifferently to his pain, he felt the unbearable weight of his own loneliness. With a cup of coffee in his hands, Arthur lost himself in bitter reflections, recalling happy moments with Helena, and then the devastating intensity of his days with Isabella. He missed the serene stability of the former, and the overwhelming passion of the latter. He realized, perhaps too late, that both had given him exactly what was missing in his life. However, he had chosen the wrong path. He had tried to possess everything, and, in the end, had been left with nothing. Arthur let out a heavy sigh as a cruel question took shape in his mind. Would he ever be able to love again, after having caused so much pain and emotional destruction? The doubt was disturbing and accompanied every minute of his day, becoming a constant and bitter presence. A sudden memory invaded his thoughts, the first time he saw Isabella at that charity event, smiling with irony and defiance. That night, He still had the chance to back down, to preserve the perfect life he had built with Helena, but he didn't, preferring to risk everything in exchange for more intense and unknown emotions. Now he could clearly see the error of his ways, but it was too late to turn back. Slowly, Arthur walked to the window, looking out at the distant horizon, knowing that he would have to face the definitive consequences of his impulsive decisions. There was no going back, nor was there any way to erase the deep scars that would forever remain on his heart and on those he loved. "I thought I could have everything," he murmured softly to himself, with bitter sadness permeating every word. "In the end, I have nothing." As the painful silence took over the empty mansion, Arthur finally understood that some losses were irreversible. Some wounds would never heal completely. His only hope was to learn from that devastating mistake and perhaps one day be able to start again, this time with enough wisdom to value what really mattered. But that night, alone and shrouded in darkness, Arthur felt for the first time the fear that he might never be able to love again. The price paid for his choices had been too high, and now he had to face the consequences of the life he had chosen to live.